so great to see you all here. This is always one of my favorite events of the year because it's all about celebrating and getting people in a room who may not see each other very frequently. And it's all about really singing the praises of the people in our communities, in every community across the province, who put themselves forward to do things with absolutely no financial return. I don't like to say there's no compensation, because in fact I think anyone who volunteers gets as much in return as they give. Even though they may start from that giving perspective, it really is such an opportunity to meet new people, to learn about new things, to figure out how your community works, and to figure out all the other things that you might want to do with your life. And one of the things that always intrigues me, and I remember this from years ago, you'd look at people who had any kind of a profile in any sector, and the immediate assumption would be they want to go into politics. That the reason why they were involved with the Lions Club or the Kinsmen or Rotary or Girl Guides was because they had some deeper ambition. And so while lots of us never had that deeper ambition, certainly I think the value that people get in taking leadership in community groups is really something that we have to value in Canada and in many of our democratic countries. I think we forget that really this is where many of us get our first taste of democracy. It's when we get involved with a non-profit organization, it's probably the first time we can really have our say and not have somebody bat us down and tell us to be quiet. It's where we can take leadership. It's where we learn to build consensus. It's where we learn how to take positions, to see a problem and go hunting for the solution. And so I think in many ways, the guest speaker who I'm about to introduce, our Premier, is probably a very good example of that. Is when I've looked at his bio, I see that he's been involved in many ways as a volunteer on professional organizations, in sports, at grassroots levels. And so I suspect, Premier, that a lot of your motivation probably came from that kind of work that you did in your community. But just before I ask you to come up, there are a couple of other points I'd just like to make. One of the things that is really important, I think, as we progress through the next number of years in Newfoundland and Labrador, is to fully understand that the work that's done by volunteers is actually just about always connected to a non-profit organization. Volunteers don't generally work on their own. Of course, people are involved in individual acts of kindness, but very often it's because they get involved with a group. And we have about 3,200 or 3,300 organizations in this province. And those organizations make up what we now like to call the community sector. And if you take just 2 or 3 seconds to think about that community sector and all of those organizations, it doesn't take long before we start to conclude that the community sector, however you want to call it, is central to social and economic progress in this province. There's not a community in the province that doesn't rely on our organizations. So I think we have to learn to move beyond just that social, feel-good kind of social service kind of notion that we sometimes have, to actually being able to say we are also part of the economic engine. And to me, that having now celebrated Volunteer Week for 40 years, to me the question is, okay, what's the next 40 years going to bring? Well, okay, for me maybe not 40 years, but for me the next few years, what are they going to bring? And how are we going to learn from what we've done in the past, find new ways of doing it, and moving forward? So I guess, Premier, that's one of the reasons why we like to have you come and speak. It's because you have a very significant role to play in our province in terms of how we do move forward. And I think one of the things that we recognize about your government, especially in some of the pronouncements that we've seen in the way forward, you acknowledge the fact that there is this importance around the community sector, around volunteers, and the role that we all play. And I think probably if we're looking forward to the next few years, being able to find a way to solidify the work that we do, so that these organizations are not always working in isolation, but find ways of really working in a much stronger, collaborative and connected way. So that's certainly the commitment that CSC likes to make, and we look forward to working with all of our good friends who are here today, and to those of you who work with non-profit organizations and who volunteer. My hats are off to you all the time, and so much of what you do is silent, but so much of what you do is so critically important. It's wonderful to have you all here. Premier, I'll ask you now to come forward.